Hey kiddos, like I told you, we're doing one slideshow for each of the new areas. So we're moving away from Latin America now into Europe. We won't do an activity with Europe per se, just because so much of world history is spent on Europe that you're going to get a lot of information about Europe as we move forward. But I do want to give you some things that will help prepare you for next year in World Civ as you look at the different components of European culture and geography. So here's a quick little overview of European geography. There will be a comprehension check after this, a short little quiz. I think it has around 20 questions that will go in the computer and be graded automatically as we move forward. So looking at the geography of Europe. So just looking at this, switching so I have a pen. It is called a peninsula of peninsulas. If you remember, a peninsula is a geographic feature. It's a body of land that's surrounded by water. So you can see there is one peninsula here, there's a peninsula here, a peninsula here, a peninsula here, a little bit of a peninsula here, a peninsula here, a peninsula here, and so forth. So you can see there is a lot of different peninsulas that make up Europe. And then there's this one larger body right through here. So it is called a peninsula of peninsulas because there's so many peninsulas off of it. And honestly, you could say that Europe as a whole is one big peninsula off of this Euro-Asian continent. So it is interesting to see the geographic features that are there, and then the impacts that they have on Europe as a whole. The Northern Peninsula, if we're looking at the Scandinavian Peninsula, is Norway and Sweden. So I'm going to move my camera back down to over here so you can see. So Norway, Sweden, usually most people group Finland into these different cultures, but it is the Scandinavian Peninsula. There's fjords, if I can say the word, but those are sea-filled valleys carved out by glaciers. So right through here, much around. This is going to be the this general map area is more of where the Frozen storyline comes from. Jutland is a northern peninsula opposite of the Scandinavian peninsula. Is a major geographic feature of Denmark. So you can see part of this, but all of these cultures are very similar. Most of them are Viking cultures that they started as Vikings and developed over time. But you can see because of the nature, especially as you're looking up here into all these areas, a lot of these cultures are going to have sea life and boating, fishing as their way of life. The ocean cuts into the sides of the countries. There's lots of areas there for opportunities where cities are developed along the coastlines. This, like I said, is the Viking culture. They would stay up here and then go out and conquer and then come back. And I wouldn't even say conquer. I'd say more of a pillage, right? They're not staying in areas. Sometimes they do, especially as you look into Russia. They do move into Russia eventually. But they're taking over lands, getting everything they want, and then coming back. So a lot of cultures there. Here's those fords that I was mentioning in Norway. Looking at the southern peninsulas, there's the Iberian Peninsula, and the Iberian Peninsula makes up Spain and Portugal. So Portugal is a little country, Spain is this, but the Iberian Peninsula is right there. The Apennine Peninsula, or Italy, is shaped like a boot, kicking the football down here. So you can see there's a boot right here. But yeah, Italy shaped like a boot. The Balkan Peninsula is down here. It's Greece and these other regions through here. So Albania, Bulgaria, Greece, Romania. The mountainous transportation is difficult. Specifically, mountains are through this area. A lot of mountains come down in here too. There's just a lot of mountains over this region that make terrain very difficult. So here is the Apennine Peninsula. You can see some of the different structures and geographic features that are there. Another important feature I'm going to move myself up here, Europe, is all the islands that are there. Now, some of the islands are directly part of the continental shift, or Europe as a whole. Other islands are more disconnected. So the Atlantic Islands, or the land of fire and ice, so there's a lot of volcanoes that and glaciers that exist. Iceland up here is really what it's talking about. But then also the British Isles. Those are in this region right here. So if we're looking at England, Scotland, which are both on here, Wales, and then Northern Ireland and Ireland on this part. So England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and Northern Ireland are there. And then Iceland is up here. If we're looking at the Mediterranean islands, so we're looking down in the Mediterranean Sea. All of these ones through here are what it's talking about as a whole. And here's Malta. We're going to get back to that a little bit later. So looking at the Iceland, how new islands are formed, we should talk about you should talk about in some of your classes about how islands are formed from volcanoes. This is an example of how that's occurring. Just a quick note, Greenland, Iceland were named by Denmark because they were trying to get people to go there. Greenland is actually mostly ice. Iceland is mostly green. They did name them that way because they wanted people to go for specific reasons. And I'm sure you can come up with what they wanted them to do. In Iceland, new islands are formed from the volcano. Here is some example of the volcanoes that are active there. And I think that this image is pretty cool because it actually shows how these islands are developing, or how land is developing to from the volcano. So as the lava comes out, we know that is molten lava. Land hits the water. The lava hits the water and creates new land. And you can see islands up there, and over time they get vegetation, and then they'll start to get wildlife too. Here's another island. It's one of the Mediterranean islands in Corsica. There's lots of people that go there to travel to experience the Mediterranean cultures. The port town of in Sicily. Here's Malta. I told you we were going to get back to them. But notice all of the boats they have there. A lot of these, especially, they're very old cultures that live along these islands, because this area of the world has been populated for so long. But they've learned to live with and on and around these water features. So there's a lot of boats there, and boats can sometimes become their main form of transportation. Then looking at the mountains, the Alps arc across, and I'm going to shift my little camera back down here. The Alps arc across France, Italy, Germany, Switzerland. This is what it's showing up here. This is the Alps right through this region. So you can see where they're going through and what parts of the world they make up. The Pyrenees Mountains block off Spain and Portugal from the rest of Europe. So if we're looking here, the Pyrenees are going through this area right here. They really do separate the Iberian Peninsula from the rest of Europe. And oftentimes these became a area that protected them too, especially as France and all of these different culture, France, Britain, the different countries battled up through that region. It insulated Spain from some of those conflicts. Obviously, Spain got into the conflicts. There's boats that go around. But land travel made it more difficult to come through that region. The Apennine Mountains run like a spine down Italy, and that's what this is showing right here. They come through this region of Italy. And then the Balkan Mountains block off the peninsula from the rest of Europe. So this is those mountain ranges, and I tried to draw them on that last image for you. And really they come down into here as well. So, moving forward. Here's a picture of the Alps. A lot of people know the Swiss Alps. There's something that has kept Switzerland also insulated, because Switzerland, especially if we go back, you can see is mainly in the Alps. So protects them, keeps them insulated, keeps them more unattainable, and has left them out of conflicts most frequently throughout world history. Switzerland usually remains neutral in most every conflict that's going on. The Pyrenees Mountains. Then looking to rivers. Rivers are important transportation routes that carry goods between the coastal harbors and the inland regions. The Danube is 1,700, almost 1,800 miles long, and links Europeans to the Black Sea and touches 9 countries. So comes to the Black Sea, and really it's one of the major sources of for Germany. Germany lives on the Danube River. And then looking at the Rhine, also comes through Germany. Flows about 820 miles from the interior of Europe to the North Sea. And these rivers will be why Germany is one of the first countries to industrialize in world history. So it is important, and it becomes one of the industrial giants. And if you look, the Rhine, unlike the Danube, while the Danube still has some built on the mountainside, the Rhine has so many tributaries that feed into it that it really is the source of transportation from the sea into Europe. And then over time, Europeans built a lot of canals off the Rhine that helped to further service the rest of Europe. So there's the Danube. Notice there's some more of this terraced farming along the sides. Here's the Rhine. Beautiful countryside. And then looking at some human environment interactions, specifically looking at the polders, or the land from the sea. The Dutch reclaimed the land from the sea for their growing population. If you can see, this map does a good job of showing how that was done. So they built dunes, sand dunes, and beach for about 200 miles. And then eventually cleared out all of this area. It was below sea level, so they built it up to where this is now part of their city. So all of this is land that they've reclaimed from the sea by building up these dunes. So they built them up, and then all of this just emptied out. This same process was used in New Orleans. So New Orleans is actually below sea level as well, which is why when Hurricane Katrina came through, it was so devastating for New Orleans, because once those dunes broke, once their levees broke in New Orleans, it floods the area. So if water comes over or these break, all of these areas would fill back in with the sea. So it makes it particularly dangerous. But generally, they've been pretty safe throughout history. Here's some of the flower cultivation in the polders of the Netherlands. Usually, if land is coming from the sea like that, it's super fertile. So there's a lot of agriculture that can happen in this region. It makes it super easy to grow stuff there. Then looking at Venice. I have a picture of Venice on the next slide. But Venice is a very ancient city. And it's an island here. And keep in mind, as we're looking at rising sea levels, because the globe is warming up, a city that is built on the sea like this becomes at risk. So there's canals, a lot of pollution in Venice. They have a serious problem with tourism. City is made up of 120 islands, part of a mainland. There's a grand canal and a broad waterway that flows between two of the largest islands. There's more than 150 canals that snake through the islands. What happens is all of these buildings have been built, but the pollution, the cruise ships, all of the different components that are coming to Venice is eroding the bottom of the islands. So the city is actually sinking in on itself because it's become so polluted. But then also the rising water levels makes it very dangerous to live there. One of the things that Venice is actually discussing doing is making a tourist price to even visit there. So you'd have to pay to even visit the city. So it's something that they're doing to try to combat Venice. There's actually no fast food restaurants in Venice. It's something that they've done to protect their culture. But there are other types of fast food, like picking up pizza and stuff like that, that is putting some of their restaurants out of business. So a lot of the people that live inside of Venice are wanting to do things to protect their culture and their way of life from tourists. Because if you can imagine, so there's about 60,000 tourists a day that show up to Venice. So imagine all these people that come in there and aren't staying there because there's not enough room to actually stay. I mean, there's some hotels, but they come to Venice for a day and then leave. So they're not staying. And if they're doing that, their culture becomes very touristy. So there's tourist stores everywhere. But then the people that live there lose all of those different components that they love about their city. And then the pollution there, the industrial waste, sewage, salt water are eating away at the foundations. And as the water rises, flooding is happening. So here's a picture of Venice. This is one of those cities that I was talking about that boating is your way around. So you use your boat to get through the city, to go from place to place. It's kind of interesting. So Europe is a multicultural continent. More than 30 languages whose people speak more than 50 different languages. 30 countries speaking 50 different languages. One of the things that's also happened a lot to Europe right now is an influx of refugees from the Middle East. So people have been coming to Europe, making even more cultural and changes to their society. Recent years have seen Europeans wanted to be unified, and many countries belong to the European Union. Now, one of the trends that has happened even more recently is a phenomenon called nationalism. And you're going to talk about nationalism in World Civ, especially in the run-up to World War I and World War II. And there's some good and bad with nationalism. Good in nationalism is you take pride in your country and want to make your country the best that it can be. When nationalism goes to an extreme is when you think you're better than everyone else. And then what starts to happen is you start to think your country is superior and you start to shun other countries. And so what's happened is a lot of countries have started wanting to leave the European Union, and some because they don't feel like they've had a fair shot. Some, like England, are in the process of trying to actually get out. If you've heard of the term Brexit, as Britain is exiting the European Union. And that is what number 8 is here. So they've actually formed a conglomerate here to where they have the same currency, the euro. Goods and services are able to easily go between the different countries. But like I said, United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union. Or they're trying to get out. They're still in it for now, but they have voted to leave. And it is a process. If your country is so economically intertwined, it's a process to try to get out of, and that's something they're working through right now. Skipping past this. Europe is smaller than any other continent except for Australia. Only Asia is more densely populated. So if we're looking at land mass, there's a lot of people that live in a very small area. Asia, especially in these regions, are very densely populated, which means there's a lot of people on top of each other within a certain area. Europe's population, and this was around 511 million. It has most definitely gone up by now. There is some surging population areas in Europe. Germany ranks as the most heavily populated nation in Europe with 82 million. Vatican City is the smallest country in the world with a population of around 1,000. We know that's where the Pope lives, in Vatican City right there. It is only 109 acres and important because it is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. So number 10 is religion. Religion has shaped European values. Most of Europe's Christians are Roman Catholic in Southern Europe, and in Northern Europe, they are Protestant. They're Eastern Orthodox faith in Eastern Europe. So we're looking at this region right here. So we're talking Catholics through a lot of this area right here, and I'll change Protestants in these areas. Eastern Orthodox there. They're all Christian, so Eastern Orthodox is a Christian faith. This has to do with the separation of the Rome. If you remember in 7th grade when you talked about Rome dividing, East Rome went to this religion. West Rome went to Catholicism. This is when it became Constantinople. West Rome was Roman Catholic, and then this one divided and created Protestants. It was the Protestant Reformation. So that wraps up Europe. You'll have a short quiz that you'll take, and then you'll be good to go for this week. Have a great weekend.